you. All right, so welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. This is Cesar Trabanco from the Global Chamber, and this is the second part of our Global Chamber Brazil series. We started last week with a group of members, and there was a really good conversation about general economic outlook, specific opportunities. They discussed about renewable energy, mining, climate technology, water and sanitation. They cover a lot of areas, specific tax opportunities. We learn about how the taxes benefits and incentive, they range from state to state and even municipal. We talk about HR, about how to hire someone in Brazil. So we cover a little bit of really more on the operation side of things. And we're gonna be leaving the link to that first session here in the chat. But then today, we're gonna be covering more on the cultural aspects, cross-cultural aspects specifically, that companies from abroad, they need to consider when doing business in Brazil. And we will have our member in Barcelona, Marc Flo-Martín from Bossa Global Connection as our moderator today. And Marc, he's from originally from Barcelona, but has spent over 10 years living and working in Brazil. And he can definitely kick off the conversation with a little bit more information about his own experience as a foreigner doing business in Brazil, and tell us a bit, Marc, a little bit about what your company is doing, how you're helping and connecting um, entrepreneurs between Europe and Brazil and worldwide, and then you take it over to the next speaker. So, Marc, thank you for your time. Thank you for jumping in and your leadership, and it is a pleasure to learn more from you today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cesar, and hello, everyone. Absolutely. I consider I was born and raised in Barcelona, but I consider myself Brazilian, right? And I'm married to a Brazilian, and my kids are Brazilian. So culturally now, I can say I'm Brazilian, which was not the case 15 years ago when I first arrived in Sao Paulo, right? So I lived in Sao Paulo for over a decade. And I was in the printing sector at the time. I represented or I was working for a French multinational, and I was in charge of the Brazilian market. And when I reached there, I got there with the mission to open up the market for that French company, right? And even if I'm Spanish, and one can think that Spain and Brazil can be culturally quite similar, well, this is not always the case. So there are some cultural aspects to be borne in mind, and I'm sure that our speakers today will go deep into it. So I'm looking forward to hearing about them. In my opinion, what I think is in Brazil you need to be careful with the expectations, right? I mean, it's a huge country. It offers huge possibilities, but you need to respect the timings, and you need to manage the expectations. The Brazilians, for those who are who already know the meaning of the culture, the peach and the coconut culture. Brazilians are very much aligned with the peach culture, meaning they are all very friendly and they are very open. And at the beginning, when you have a meeting with them, you end the meeting taking for granted that the deal is done, right? And that's not necessarily the case. It's just not because they are friendly and they talk about their lives and their family and football and stuff. It doesn't mean that you're gonna be closing a deal with them right away, right? So it takes time. So be careful on that, because that's probably one of the first things that I learned from Brazil, and that was not only or it's not applicable only to the professional part, but also to the personal part. Because when I got there, I was single and I didn't have many friends. So when I started meeting people, and they all were all telling me, "Look, we need to catch up and let's do something on the weekend." And then it's like, okay, so you are counting on that, and then weekend comes and nobody calls you, right? So you need to be careful with the expectations. It's a very pitch culture. But then once you start building trust and once you respect those timings, you can really do very good business with Brazil. And it's also a little bit informal as well at some point. So you can usually 15 to 20 minutes late, getting 15 to 20 minutes late to a meeting, that's acceptable. And I was told every time that I was always very much on time, because I am always very much on time. And I was known in the market because I was the guy getting to the meetings on time, because so it's 15 to 20 minutes. It's very acceptable. So it really depends, but at the end it pays off if you know how to navigate that. So that's the important part, and it makes it's good to do the effort to do that. So from the professional part, so what I do today at Bossa Global Connection. So I'm the co-founder, and today we help companies and investors enter the Brazilian market, whether it is on M&A operations, whether it is on investing in renewable energy projects, which was mentioned in the first session, by the way, and that was very, very interesting, or in commodity sourcing as well. And so in commodity sourcing, that's also another example how things work in Brazil, because most of the buyers that I work with, most of them in the Middle East and Asia, they are afraid of doing business with Brazil because they got scammed, or because they think that the country is not very trustful. So I try to convince them, and that's the reality, that there is very solid and very professional people and serious people working there. But then also the timings of the answer. So the Asians, for example, they expect an answer right away. And it sometimes takes 1 or 2 days to get the answer. So again, expectations, right? So, having said that, I would like to introduce the three speakers for today. So the first one is Luiza Dreasher. So she's the CEO of Mastering Cultural Differences, and she's got 20 years plus of experience in the areas of inclusive leadership and cultural competence development. And she's been featured on major media platforms. She's been on ABC, NBC, Fox, iHeartRadio, and she's also a top voice program on LinkedIn. So congrats on that as well, Luiza. Then we will have also two people from Auerbach, Chris Hempel and Erick Dantas. So Chris, he's based in Greater Los Angeles, and he spent most of his career in there in technology, publishing, and sales. And he's the director of client success. He's more focused on expanding relationships and new markets and business niches. And Erick is the director of the operations in Brazil and Latin America. And he's based in Rio de Janeiro, and he specializes in localization strategy, multilingual project management, and cross-cultural business communication. And then we will also hear from Lucas Gomes. So Lucas is a B2B marketing and social media expert, and he's the founder and CEO of Onda Scheme. And he helps executives from some of the largest companies in the world to turn their personal brands into powerful engines for business growth. So I think we can get started with Luiza. I think that, Luiza, you do have a presentation that you'd like to share. Anyway, I would like to hear from you also on what do you think are some of the key cultural differences, right? That a business leader should bear in mind when entering the Brazilian market. So Luiza, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
No notes?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here with all of you. And actually, I'm not at the beginning. As Marc said, I'm Luiza Dreasher, founder and CEO of Mastering Cultural Differences. And I work with organizations interested in creating high-performing teams. And we offer consulting and customized workshops focusing on inclusive leadership and cultural differences impacting global teams. Today, I'll share some key cultural differences between Brazil and the United States that could help you avoid some costly missteps and build a successful business in Brazil if that's what you're looking for. Because the reality is, you can have the perfect strategy, the best product, but if you miss the cultural nuances, you will likely miss the opportunity. In other words, cultural blindness is not an effective approach. Because recognizing cultural differences is critical for international business. So the goal is not to ignore these differences, but to leverage them strategically. And before I get started on the differences, let me make a disclaimer. Treat these differences that I'm sharing as starting points or guiding principles. No cultural difference will apply to everyone at all times. So there will always be an exception. But they are starting points. I think this is a good definition for that. The first difference has to do with relationships, and I think Mark has already talked about that. In Brazil, I would say business is deeply personal. You're not just negotiating contracts, you are building human connections, and that is really very important. So, what that means is that you need to invest time outside formal meetings, sharing meals, casual conversations, asking about families, going to a soccer match, it truly getting to know each other. With the caveat, it's important. And for you to do that, it will help tremendously if you know the language. So for US Americans who are used to a more transactional business model, this will certainly feel different. So I would encourage you to see this not as a waste of time, but as a powerful opportunity to create connections. So keep in mind that even the best business strategies will, fail if you don't invest in building relationships first. Excuse me. Another significant cultural difference I would say has to do with the way Brazilians communicate. Brazilian communication, tends to be what we call high context. In other words, not everything will be communicated to you directly. For high context communicators, so the message is often implicit. It's not going to be conveyed to you directly. The receiver or the listener assumes the responsibility to discover the hidden meaning of the message. Of the message. In other words, read between the lines. What else is being communicated here that I need to pay attention to? And the message up front is not necessarily the real message. So you have to think, what other messages are being transmitted here? What else do I need to be paying attention to? And there is less of a need to repeat what was decided. And I remember this was one of the big arguments that I had with my brother, who was, worked in a multinational corporation in São Paulo for a couple of decades and was managing, international teams. And, in the US, the idea is you tell what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, then you tell them what you told them. Well, this strategy emphasizes the importance of repetition to ensure the message is understood. But the reality is, for many other groups, this really infuriates high contextualizers because people know what has been decided, who should do, who should do what, without having to go through all the levels of clarification that individuals expect in the United States. So, and my brother used to do that, and it really infuriated me. And I didn't realize that that was the issue because yes, he's Brazilian, but because of his working in multinational corporation, working with international teams, we would finish a Zoom call, for example, minutes later would be, you know, here's what we decided, that here's what we're gonna do. And I'm like, I was in the meeting. I know what happened. There's no need to repeat. So keep that in mind. For low context communicators like US Americans and many others, good communication is about clarity, is about precision. The speaker carries the responsibility of making sure that the message is understood. For example, explicitly spelling out the ideas, providing all the background knowledge and details necessary for others to understand the message. Repetition is appreciated and clarification is a good business practice. And at the end of a meeting, here's what we decided, and then recap the meeting. So you see the difference between, the two groups. So I would say, best strategies for communicating with Brazilians, learn to listen for what is meant instead of what is being said. Get in the habit of what the Chinese say, reading the air. In other words, what else is there beyond the words? Understand that no can come in many different ways. Like, I'll do my best. Let me consider it. Remember that there's less of a need to repeat what was decided, and never assume they're purposefully omitting information or trying to mislead you. It is a cultural difference, and you need to keep that in mind. I remember I was at the in Tokyo at the 3M headquarters. I was having a conversation with one of the managers there, and he was expressing, he was U.S. American, and he was expressing his frustration because his Japanese supervisor was not telling him all the expectations, all he needed to do. Obviously, he was not aware of this cultural difference because here he is in Japan expecting everything to be communicated to him, and his Japanese supervisor, it's his job to figure it out, ask questions. I don't have to tell him directly. So these, cultural differences do have an impact, and you need to pay attention to that. Another important cultural difference, I would say, is hierarchy and respect for authority. And this is, hierarchy plays an important role in Brazilian organizations. And you need to understand that what makes a good leader varies a great deal between Brazil and the United States. So when you compare Brazil and the United States, don't worry about these dimensions here. We're not talking about them. This is what I call power distance, the hierarchical. You can see this is the United States and this is Brazil. So there's a big difference between the two countries. For U.S. Americans, for example, the leader is one of the guys, not someone who gives orders. Their thinking is, I'm not above my team. We are all equals. The workplace tends to be more informal. And most people are on a first, name basis. In a staff meeting, all voices count. Doesn't matter from the intern, from the senior director. Everyone, is expected to share. And leaders often have an open door policy. Brazil, it's definitely a lot more hierarchical than the United States. Employees, for example, they tend to use title, they defer to leaders and follow directions, tend to wait for direction, show deference, to those in charge. follow the hierarchical chain of commanding. Level hopping is not appropriate. If I'm in Brazil, I do not go directly to the CEO. I go to my immediate supervisor who goes to their supervisor and so forth. There is no such a thing as going up to the CEO unless you are invited. Leaders expect to be treated with deference. I'm not one of them. I was doing a session once and a US American individual came in a bit late and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, my supervisor threw in a barbecue and we were late." And there was a Korean individual in the audience, and she was absolutely horrified. She could not understand that a boss here would cook for their employees. And she said, "My father is a business person. He would never cook for his employees. His employees would lose respect for him if he was cooking for them. It would never happen." Hierarchy. Leaders maintain a greater distance with staff. Otherwise, they may lose respect of employees. Let me give you an example. In a hierarchical culture, let's say you talk to your IT person, and then they say, "Okay, this is the problem. These are possible solutions. How do you want me to handle it?" A more egalitarian leader will likely push the problem down. "You know the situation better than I do. You are the expert, not me. So you tell me what the best course of action should be." So when working with Brazilians, you need to honor these, structures while at the same time creating safe, smaller spaces where junior team members feel more empowered to contribute because it's not going to come naturally. So you have to create that space for that to happen. Another big difference is time orientation. And this is a huge one. In fact, in my book, I share some of the mistakes that I made when I, first came to the United States. And it had to do because of the way Brazilians and US Americans view and use time. Researchers have found that there are two distinct ways individuals use time. There's the monochronic and polychronic. And this was an actual research that was done. And the researchers asked the subjects to imagine there are 6 patrons in the shop ready to check out. And so they asked the subjects to draw circles to represent the customs. So this was a typical answer of those with a monochronic orientation. People expect to be waited on, one at a time and in order of arrival. If I arrived first, I need to be helped first. If I'm last, then I should be the last. Now, look what happened when they asked participants with a polychronic orientation. Welcome to Brazil. For polychronic respondents, the order of arrival is not important. Human connections take priority over strict schedules or timelines. Think about it. If I have a long-term relationship with the clerk, meaning I've been buying at this store in the barrio, for many years, decades, the chances I will be helped first are much higher. So relationships matter in more ways than you think. As far as the monochronic orientation, which is the orientation of those in the US, time is a commodity, should not be wasted. We buy time, we waste time, and so forth. Time is gold, time is money. Deadlines, schedules, keeping to the task are very important. Time is seen as in a linear way, one event happening at a time. It is really not appropriate. If I'm in a meeting, then my husband called and I stopped the meeting to answer my phone. Yet the literature is filled with examples of this exact same thing happening in cross-cultural negotiations. People may be too busy to see you, and to be kept waiting is really considered unprofessional. Now, for those with a more polychronic orientation, time is limitless and not quantifiable. There's always more time. I remember, my shock when I started teaching in the United States. I'm doing my lecture, and about 5 minutes before the end, students are already, closing their notebooks, their books, back in their backpack, and getting ready to leave. And I'm like, oh my God, how rude is that? I'm still speaking. They have to get to the next class. So I can stay there speaking, but they're gone. And the reverse of that, I took a class, an online class with a Brazilian doctor. And it was interesting because none of us knew the direction of the program. It was not communicated, it was not on the website, which was actually 4 hours. And none of us were prepared to do that. And the last day, she spoke for one, not two, not three. She spoke for 4 hours and 58 minutes. Now you think about that. Would a meeting in the United States go, beyond, the expected time for 58 minutes? People are never too busy. Schedules and deadlines, can be easily changed. Relationships are more important than keeping to the task. Plans are fluid. There's no such a thing as an interruption. And to be late or kept waiting is okay. So the bottom line is, time is flexible in Brazil. It reflects a focus on relationships rather than strict schedules. Meetings may not start exactly on time. Agendas may shift depending on the conversation. Instead of seeing this as disorganization, you need to view this as a responsiveness. They're prioritizing connection and trust building, which is very, very important when doing business in Brazil. And your role is to stay adaptable, be patient, and open to the flow of conversation. And this last one is another huge cultural difference. And in fact, I dedicated a whole chapter of my book to these cultural differences because it impacts many aspects of the organization, the interview process, talent recognition, how decisions are made, how goals are achieved, performance evaluation. We don't have time to fully go over this dimension. And here it is, comparing Brazil and the United States. This is the United States, and this is Brazil. The United States is considered one of the most individualistic, countries in the world. So there's a huge difference. For Brazilians, the needs of the group, meaning the family, the organization, are more important than those of the individual. The success of the group ensures the well-being of the individual. Group harmony, loyalty, consensus are highly valued. For example, when a promotion opportunity, arises at work, a U.S. American employee, might focus on, highlighting their individual accomplishments. For example, I increased sales by 20%. I completed 3 major projects ahead of schedule. I earned a certification. A Brazilian employee might emphasize how they contributed to the team's success. I helped our department exceed its goals. I maintained strong relationships with our clients during our transition. In fact, this is something that I caution the individuals I'm working with here in the United States, especially if they are hiring to bring in more diversity into the organizations. They have to pay attention to these aspects. So the bottom line is US Americans tend to showcase personal merit. I did this, I did this, I did this, and this. Brazilians demonstrate their value to the team and to the organization. I know I threw a lot of you. Feel free to take a screenshot, connect with me. You can get my email, my LinkedIn link. In fact, the concept I introduced earlier, cultural blindness, my last LinkedIn article was about that. And I have put this information and also other cultural differences in an ebook, which you can download, just, feel free to scan the QR code and you can do that. And if you prefer the Portuguese version, email me and I'll be happy to send it to you.
Thank you so much, Luiza. Thank you so much. And so many things that you said resonate with me. So it's been an amazing presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, now I would like to introduce Erick and Chris. I think it's Chris, the one who is going to be presenting from the Auerbach team. Is that right? It's Chris?
Yes, that's correct.
Very good, Chris. All right, so the floor is yours if you want to share your presentation with the audience.
Let me do that right now.
Good.
Where is it? Who's it? Oh, goodness. Hang on one moment.
Well, we know it works because we tried already at the beginning.
We saw it before, exactly. Come on now. Where are you? One moment, Mark. I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries. In the meantime, Luiza, it's right what you said, that in Brazil, a lot of people don't say don't use the word no, so you really need to read between the lines. That's a very, very important piece of advice. Okay, very good. So we've got the presentation here. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Louise, a wonderful presentation, and I hope this builds on it, actually on a more fundamental basis. As you're talking about, all the nuances of interactions, et cetera. Ours is, this discussion is more about the fundamentals of communication at the most basic written level, or in some cases, not translated, but rather interpreted levels, and the nuances necessary to have a very successful conversation and ongoing relationship via written word. So, and as we talked about, and as you pointed out so succinctly, Brazil is such a such a diverse, over 200 million people, 5 major regions, huge, unique natures of each one of those regions and how communications are done. Nuance is everything. Miscommunication in international business in general is so often cultural mismatching, unclear language, and poor translation. And what we come up against so oftentimes in our business is people have used less professional organizations to do their translations. In turn, those organizations tend to use not fully vetted linguists that have multiple years of professional experience. They're not native speakers. They may not have knowledge of the specific niche of business that they're communicating within a particular language. So, for example, in Brazil, communication is not just translating words like you said, Luiza. It's about intent, being clear about the intent, respecting the culture, and adapting to the local expectations, in particular by regions. Idioms are different in each region, obviously. For example, a U.S. HR handbook translated into Portuguese failed to address local labor practices and created confusion and was legal risk. And that's why it's so important to utilize a firm when you are doing translations that has proficiency in understanding the laws of the nature of, in particular, in this case, Brazil, understanding the laws as they interact in a particular industry. Also, this perception of it's good enough in translations, it's never good enough. I mean, if you look at this chart, just go down, this is the English proficiency in countries in Latin America in 2023. Look how far down Brazil is. Very low proficiency. Only 1 to 3% use English comfortably Brazilians use English comfortably in business meetings. That's probably far lower than most people would expect. And only 5% have any proficiency in English in Brazil. So if you're coming from Canada or North America and you're expecting to do business in Brazil, you've got to recognize you need a professional firm to help you communicate clearly, succinctly, and accurately within the context of the cultural environment, as Luiza pointed out. Okay. Uh, in Brazil, it's continental. Linguistically, variations are enormous, as Erick can speak to. As being such a diverse country, there's almost limitless misinterpretations that can occur when things are being translated. So you have to be extremely careful on how translations are done. As you can see in this rather funny cartoon, young boy calls his mother after having not spoken to her for a while and misstates the name and doesn't roll his R. She hangs up on him. He calls back, he rolls his R. Oh, my son, it's so good to hear from you. So things as simple as that. So if you're using interpreters, make sure you have a professional interpreter that understands the unique nature of by area, what works and what doesn't work, what little things have such enormous meaning. Luiza, you pointed that out very well in last your presentation, but it's just those tiny things that can make an enormous difference. A rolled R in this case, a difference between a mother speaking to her son or not speaking to her son. When communications fail, there's tone, there's idioms, there's false cognates. There's a million different things that can go wrong. For example, at Walmart, here's a cultural difference. We know at Walmart, everyday low prices that's their big push, but Brazilians prefer promotions and bulk discounts. They don't want the everyday low price. That doesn't connect with them. Airbnb, when they launched, they had a casual tone. They used American idioms, totally out of place in Brazil. They were confused. They were skeptical. It was a bomb. They had to go back and fashion their entire marketing program to make it connect with the Brazilian market. And legal contracts, we touched on that a little earlier, but if the wording is not correct based on local idioms and conversational tone, et cetera, it can invalidate a contract. In this case, binding terms of a contract. This is an actual case that did occur. Was a non-compete clause that blew up the whole deal. So you have to be extremely careful about those types of things. And this, I think, and Marc, you would know this, especially having been from Spain to begin with. This is very common amongst many, many different countries. The unique nature of both regions and cultural differences can make an enormous impact if communications aren't exactly perfect. Successful strategies that work in Brazil. First two case studies are actually creations of ours based on actual use. Don't take these as rote, but there was an onboarding situation where 50% translating and localization content by our company helped the onboarding by 50% rather. It sped it up. The second case was we co-developed a bilingual glossary to align Brazilian operations with the headquarters, and it reduced miscommunication by 70%. This also happened with the company we work with, Fujitsu, in Northern California and then in Japan. And then the best practices, of course, was Volkswagen localizing employee training and adapted sales language that by region in Brazil, which increased our sales tenfold. And Airbnb, again, adjusted tone of the ad content relating back to the previous conversation. Again, Brazil, diverse, vast, deeply cultural. One message does not fit all. Communication clarity improves compliance, business equity, and performance. And you can't settle for just translation. You got to really invest in a strategy and cultural adaptation when you go to market in Brazil. Luiza pointed this out in what's very crucial, whether you're using our firm or whatever firm you would use. Make sure you're using a professional firm, not an AI-driven firm or an amateur linguist firm because they won't get it right. And it costs you way more to try to make up for mistakes than it does to get it right in the first place. So, for example, in our case, we've been in business we're in our 4th decade. We tailor our solutions based on the actual type of work we're doing on behalf of the client. This is look for this in any language service firm you would do, these types of key elements. You make sure they're using native linguists so that they are culturally adapted to begin with immediately, that they have deep cultural insight into Brazil and Latin America. Also, the key factors when you're picking a language service firm is you want to have as many languages covered as possible, but don't be confused. A lot of the languages you'll never run into, but the fact that they can handle all those languages tells you the depth and breadth of their knowledge. That they do not just translation, but localization. They understand the specific market they're working within. They do interpretation live or remotely. So they have the best possible number of options, whether it's a meeting for a large group of people that you need live interpreters, or if you can do it remotely for a small meeting. Do they do subtitling and dubbing? So if you have videos or video that you're putting on your website, can you do that? Do they do transcriptions? Do they do cultural screening to make sure that company names or product names fit with the local market? As we've all heard of Nova, which isn't true, that the Nova was, Chevrolet launched the Nova in Mexico, and of course it was no go. It's not a true statement, but it's a good example of what could go wrong. And then, of course, human oversight. You'll find that most language service firms, as do we, use some level of AI, at least in the initial stages of our translation. But you have to have the human element because, as Luiza pointed out, and as Marc pointed out in advance of this, is without the human aspect, the understanding of idioms and regional differences and localizations, IA on its own cannot do an accurate translation. So make sure that whether you use whatever firm you use, that they are not reliant entirely on AI, because you will not get the proper translation, the proper tone, and you will pay, believe me, one way or the other. So again, when you're thinking of using a language service firm, when you're communicating with your new clients or prospective clients in Brazil, talk about goals. Figure out what's the culturally intelligent way to communicate with that market, and then start your journey with us if possible. But really keep those factors in mind. And it goes back to what Luiza pointed out. It's so much about culture. It's so much about understanding the differences and making sure you invest in a firm that can do that on your behalf, because you won't understand how to do that yourself without Luiza's wonderful training and probably months and months of it. So, Eric, anything you'd like to add? You may not be there. Anyway,
No,
Eric,
Chris, it was excellent. I think I have nothing to share here because it's complete your presentation. Let's the Q&A and see if anyone has some question about it.
Very good. Thank you so much, Chris. Again,
Thank you so much.
many things resonate with me in your presentation. I think that I started getting adapted to Brazil once I started knowing the nuances between the regions and the accents and everything. That's when I really started getting to know the country, because it's not only about the accent, also it's about the different cultures among states, and that's very, very important. So thank you so much. Thank you. So Lucas, it's your turn now. So I think that you are going to share your screen as well. Am I right?
No, I'm just gonna keep it simple and
there you go. Perfect.
No screen sharing this time.
No worries at all. Perfect. So the floor is yours.
All right, guys. First of all, I'm super happy to be here with you guys. So thank you, Global Chamber, for the opportunity to share some of what's working in terms of marketing strategies for Brazil. Of course, Luiza, Eric, and Chris were already on point with their speeches and brought so much to the table in terms of marketing even. But I just wanted to ask a quick question here, just to see how conscious you are about the Brazilian culture. Who here has done business in Brazil before? Just raise your hands if you've done business in Brazil before. I'm Brazilian, so it's almost all right. Some people are actually raising their hands, opening up their cameras. Nice to see your faces, Brian Wagner and everyone. All right, cool. So a lot of you have actually done business in Brazil before, so you actually recognize a lot of the patterns that Luiza talked about in terms of how different the culture is from the United States, for example, where people are like super sharp and super objective. Yeah, it's different here. It's way more relationship based. But I just want to keep it really simple when we talk about marketing strategy when doing business in Brazil. I'm just going to go through three layers of what you need to think of on your marketing strategy to be successful in Brazil. Just going to go through the strategic layer, the tactical layer, and then the operational layer. And I actually picked some very specific points and tips to give you guys that might actually make a huge difference in the end. But of course, I want to make a disclaimer. Each company is unique. So you might think that just by copying some other company that's already successful in Brazil, you might be successful, but that's not going to be the case. And I'm gonna go through why that's not gonna be the case right now. But basically, Brazil is such a huge country. It's like a continental country. It's probably just as large as the United States. So there are so many subcultures within our country itself. And so basically, you just need to start thinking about expanding to Brazil by your strategy. You need to review your strategy. Of course, you need to adapt your strategy to the Brazilian market. But I believe the first thing is just noticing how much of a part Brazil plays in your overall global strategy. That's the first thing you need to notice. And before spending a single real, which is our currency here in Brazil, on campaigns, you guys need to absolutely be clear on who buys, why they buy, and how your offer must evolve for Brazil's unique environment. So that's really like, for example, like, I don't know if you guys mentioned this, but there's a lot of people from the United States that think that the culture in Brazil is very similar to other countries in South America. And it's actually, we pride ourselves from being almost like a different continent from all the other countries in South America. So it's so different. It's not just Portuguese and Spanish. It's like, it's really different from other countries in Latin America. Even Brazilian companies have a hard time expanding and internationalizing to other countries in Latin America. And it's not just because of the other language that we speak. So the first thing you need to do when you think about strategy in Brazil is segmenting Brazil by, of course, company size, vertical, and region. And that's the thing, like the different regions in Brazil are all so different from each other. I'm in the northeast of Brazil right now where I live, which is, I would say it's kind of like the Caribbean or like Florida or something like this. But imagine the difference from like Florida to Oregon. It's like almost two different countries. It's like almost like Florida and Canada or something like that. So you really need to nail where you're going to be in Brazil. And it's pretty obvious if you think about the large cities like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais. That's probably the first markets you're going to look for. But I think you should look for other regions where you might have a blue ocean or you might have less of an offer of your product. So it's really good to understand and study the regional markets in Brazil before you decide on an actual region you're going to start by. Because honestly, like unless your marketing budget is, I don't know, $1 billion a year for Brazil, you're not gonna become the #1 player nationally in like less than 3 years. I'm not kidding. So you should definitely pick a region and just really penetrate that market in a very specific way. Of course, you need to translate benefits, local case studies, and benchmark data, price in reais. Talk ROI, return on investment, in months instead of quarters, for example. But definitely, like, it's not just about like translating like your presentation or like translating whatever you're gonna put on an event. It's literally like you need to pick all your marketing assets and localize them. Really, like, you guys have no, like, Brazilians would smell a gringo coming into their country from like 100 miles away. So unless you talk like us, like, we're probably not gonna trust you as much. For example, for your go-to-market model, you can choose whether you want to go direct or via partner. And then, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but basically you can think of like a mix between the two. Going through like a partner is always faster, but going direct, you have more of like a learning opportunity, and you might grow slower, but it's more like steadier. You build more on your overall margins for the business and etc. So it's like most companies, they come to Brazil via a partner, but they end up just building this hybrid strategy where they also go direct so that they have control over the distribution, right? For the tactical part, here's some things you need to keep in mind in terms of channels. For example, once you have your positioning locked, so you basically know what region you want to go to, you basically adapted your value proposition. The next step is to build credible visibility and pipeline, of course, using the channels Brazilian people already trust. So there are a few companies, for example, that think they're gonna come from the US and use like messaging as their main channel, but Brazilians, they basically don't use like iMessage, for example, or text message. All they use is WhatsApp. So unless you're using WhatsApp, you're just throwing money in the trash, basically, by using text. So for the channel mix, there's a very important thing you should notice is Brazilians are really relationship based, as Luiza said, for example. So you need to build a strategy where you have components of scale and you have components of depth of relationship. Otherwise, you're gonna be basically forgotten. Whether you're like a B2C brand trying to get into supermarkets, or you're a B2B brand trying to build relationship with thought leaders and the decision makers in corporate companies, for example. So for the channel mix, I would think of something like ads or social media or some scalable channel. For example, LinkedIn, Instagram have been working really well. Also, TikTok is rising really fast in Brazil, just like it's rising on the States. But you should combine that with a nurturing strategy that gets really close to your ideal customer profile through WhatsApp, for example. People actually, like in most markets, people actually use way more WhatsApp than they use email. Like when I get emails from the global chamber, like I barely read them. I'm very Brazilian in that case. I've been to the States and people like empty their email folders, like their email inbox. It's not the same here. We're gonna be on WhatsApp like 24/7, but maybe not email like people do in the States. And then you should think of a layer that gets you even closer to your target audience through webinars or lives, or even in-person breakfasts, in-person workshops, in-person events, trade fairs that you all know that work really well for the Brazilian market and for the B2B market in general. But again, like if you just show up at a trade fair, it's just very like localized, it's very regional. You should combine that with a more scalable strategy through social media, for example. And then it's really it's almost like demanding these days to have a face for your company. I know this is like a big thing globally, but it's even more important in Brazil. So when you think about building a brand, you should definitely have a face for your brand. So appoint a Brazilian spokesperson. It could be a general manager, it could be the founder from another country, but it's really important that that person talks in Portuguese and that that person shows that they're really integrated in a culture, you know. So whether that's on social media or just giving lectures on events, it's really important to, and it really accelerates to build your brand through a thought leader or a face that's gonna represent your brands. Like even on WhatsApp groups, Slack, and etc. Like you would be amazed at how much engagement you would get with like an institutional brand versus a personal brand here in Brazil. It's like it's something different, you know, something different. And then for the operational part, basically once you've nailed your strategy and your channel and your distribution, you should just execute flawless, just measure whatever works and then double down on that. Just remember that sales cycle, like especially when you go into a new market, it's very normal that people are not aware of your company, are not aware of your brand, and that relationship part of the Brazilian culture plays a huge role in making sales cycle last longer. So you're not like forget, just like Luiza said, like set your expectations. Forget getting into a call with a Brazilian and closing a $100,000 deal in 30 minutes. Forget that. That's not gonna happen. Like I've done that before, but that's after like months of building relationship through social media, through LinkedIn, through WhatsApp, through whatever, you know. So you can definitely shorten that sales cycle, for example, through these scalable assets, especially with a face for the brand, and then nurturing relationship before you go into a call or a lunch or something like that. But definitely build relationships, like invest in Brazil long term. It's a growing country for like the past like 20 30 whatever years, and you definitely have a huge market here. And then just a little tip that's no one might ever talk about to you guys: avoid launches from mid-December to mid-January. People go on vacations during that time, you know. I know it's pretty common on other cultures as well, but whenever you think about launching something important, just don't do it during that period. And then another thing that Luiza talked a lot about is like respect relationship cadence with small talk, lunches, WhatsApp follow-ups. Like it's business in Brazil is like very much person to person. You're like you're never dealing with a business. You might think you're dealing with a business when you go and do business with like the largest communications group in the world, which is our client in my company, but it's always person to person. You just need to build relationship with more people if you're selling to a larger company. So a quick recap here. First of all, define and position, nail product market fit, localize your offer, so niche down and just go very specific, niche down on a specific market, on a specific region, to specific segment and vertical to be really relevant in Brazil, and choose the right go-to-market path. Second part is generate demand. Use LinkedIn, WhatsApp, webinars, Instagram, and a credible local face to create pipeline, that's amazing strategy that's going to put you in front of even Brazilian companies in your market segment. To be honest, they're kind of catching up to that. And of course, execute, optimize, just like you guys already do in your other markets, but respecting Brazilian business rhythms and refining quickly for sustained growth. I'm gonna add my my LinkedIn profile here on the comments. Would love to help you guys. Of course, my business specialized is specifically in building thought leadership by basically having the face of your company on LinkedIn to build business opportunities. We've done that for small and for some of the largest brands in the world. So it would be amazing to help you guys even further. And welcome to Brazil. We're a really welcoming culture. So we're gonna love to have you guys here to the business.
Muito obrigado, Lucas. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great. So we got to the top of the hour, Cesar. So I think that we need to stop here. I don't know if we've got some spare time for those who want to stay some more
Yes.
minutes or not. So Cesar.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
so what I'm gonna do is just to stop the recording, but then I'm gonna keep the room open for questions or anyone wants to drop a comment or question. I think presentation has been amazing. I really appreciate Luiza, Chris, Eric, and Lucas. And actually, Lucas brought a point that's really a good transition to our next session now. You know, when he mentioned about the gringo coming from far. So we will have an American speaking next time, someone who has been doing business in Brazil for 40 years, 30 or 40 years. So, and he's here today. But anyways, I'm gonna again close the room. I put the the link for the next session here in the chat, and we really expect to see you all there. It's gonna be the third and last. So thanks again. Closing the I mean, turning off the recording and then keeping the room open for a couple of minutes.